You just stole our lake." The woman's voice cut through the humid evening air like a serrated blade, sharp enough to make heads turn from 3 houses down the gravel road. I stood there on the rocky shore of Old Mill Lake, a thick manila folder tucked tight under my arm, watching 30 people form a hostile half-circle around me, while the red and blue strobe of 2 patrol cars painted the trees in anxious, flashing light. The Homeowners Association president, a woman named Diane Pritchard who wore her authority like a suit of armor, pointed a shaking finger at the small, powder-coated metal sign I had just bolted into the earth. It read "Private Property, County Deed on File." Her face went crimson, a mix of rage and disbelief that someone had finally dared to tell her no. Behind her, a jury of smartphones rose in unison, 30 glowing eyes recording my every twitch, waiting for the villain to slip up. I didn't move. I didn't try to explain myself to the mob. I just waited for the deputy to ask the question I knew was coming, because I had an answer in that folder that nobody, not Diane, not the neighbors, and certainly not the police, saw coming. It was 6:45 on a Thursday evening, and the sun hung low enough to turn the lake's surface into a sheet of hammered copper. I had driven out here with a toolbox, that metal sign, and a singular plan: mark my territory, take a photo for the insurance company, and head home to a cold beer. Simple. What I got instead was a suburban uprising. Diane Pritchard had marched down the dirt path leading the charge, 15 angry residents in tow, looking at me like I had just poisoned the town well. She was in her late 50s, wearing a navy blazer over a white blouse, far too formal for a lakeside chat, and her voice carried the absolute certainty of someone who has never been successfully challenged. "This is community property," she had spat, stopping 10 feet from me, invading my personal space just enough to be aggressive but not enough to be assaulted. "You cannot just block access to our lake." I glanced at my sign. It didn't scream. It didn't threaten. It just stated a fact. But facts, I was learning, didn't matter much to people who had been taking something for free for 40 years. The crowd grew as more residents trickled down from the street, drawn by the sirens. A woman in yoga pants whispered something toxic to the man beside her. A teenager in a basketball jersey watched me with deep suspicion, hands jammed in his pockets. The energy wasn't violent yet, but it was sitting on the edge of a knife. One wrong word, one hint of arrogance from me, and this crowd would turn from a gathering into a riot. Deputy Wade Fletcher arrived first, stepping out of his patrol car with the measured, tired calm of a man who spent his days mediating fence disputes and noise complaints. He was mid-30s, clean-shaven, wearing the neutral expression cops wear when they haven't decided who the bad guy is yet. "Evening, folks," he said, scanning the group, his hand resting near his belt, not on his gun, but close enough to send a message. "What's going on here?" Diane turned to him like she had summoned him herself. "Officer, thank goodness. This man has physically blocked access to our community lake. We have used this property for decades. He has no right to put up barriers." Fletcher looked at me. I nodded once, calm, and held up the folder. "Deputy, I'm the legal owner of this property. I have documentation." Fletcher's eyes flicked to the sign, then back to me. "Can I see that documentation?" I opened the folder and handed him 3 sheets, each one protected in a clear plastic sleeve because I knew they would be handled by dirty hands eventually. The first was the deed of sale from First National Bank, dated 3 months prior, with the property description clearly marked: Old Mill Lake and surrounding parcel. Total acreage 4.2, county record number CR 1948-0847. The second was a certificate of water rights. The third was a property survey completed by a licensed county engineer, showing the lake boundary sitting entirely, 100%, within the parcel I had purchased. Fletcher took his time reading. I watched his jaw tighten slightly as he scanned the official county stamps. Behind him, Diane shifted her weight, impatient, vibrating with indignation. Someone in the crowd muttered, "This is ridiculous." Another voice said, "He can't do this." Diane stepped closer, her voice rising. "That paper doesn't matter. We have easement rights. 40 years of public use means something under the law. You can't just erase history with a checkbook." I turned to her, keeping my tone even, the way you talk to a spooked horse. "Easement requires a recorded agreement, Diane. Do you have one?" She blinked, just for a second. "We don't need a recorded agreement. This is prescriptive easement. It's established by use. I shook my head slowly. Prescriptive easement has 5 requirements under state law: hostile use, continuous use, open and notorious use, exclusive use, and a statutory period. You fail on at least 3 of those. But even if you didn't, it still needs to be recorded with the county to be enforceable. Is it? Silence. Absolute, heavy silence. Fletcher handed the documents back to me. Sir, these look legitimate. Do you have any objection to me verifying them with the county dispatcher? None at all, I said. The county recorder's office has everything on file. Fletcher pulled out his phone and stepped away. The crowd waited. I stayed where I was, folder tucked back under my arm. I didn't need to defend myself yet. The paper was doing the heavy lifting. A man in a gray polo shirt leaned toward Diane and whispered something urgent. She shook her head sharply, dismissing him. She was all in. Fletcher returned after about 90 seconds. The county confirms the deed is recorded. The property is privately owned. Diane's face went from red to a pale, ghostly white. That's impossible. Fletcher held up a hand. Ma'am, if there's a dispute over easement rights, that is a civil matter for the courts. But as of right now, this gentleman has a legal title. He owns the dirt. He owns the water. One of the residents, an older guy with thinning hair and a faded ball cap, stepped forward. Deputy, we've been fishing here since the 80s. You're saying we just lost that? Fletcher's expression softened, just a fraction. I'm saying if there's no recorded easement, access is at the owner's discretion. That's how property law works. The old man looked at me, shook his head with profound disappointment, and walked back toward the street. The crowd began to thin, the smartphones lowered. But Diane wasn't done. She pulled out her phone and tapped furiously. Within 2 minutes, a second patrol car arrived, and Sheriff Dale Merrick stepped out. Merrick was older, in his early 50s, with gray creeping into his sideburns and the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd seen too many small-town disputes turn stupid. He walked over, listened to Fletcher's summary, and then looked at me. You're the new owner? He asked. I am. And you're blocking community access. I'm enforcing my property rights, I said. There's no recorded easement. I checked. Twice. Merrick studied me for a long moment, assessing the threat level, then turned to Diane. Ma'am, do you have documentation of an easement? Right now? In your hand. She hesitated. We have historical use. Photos. Testimonies. That's not a recorded easement, Merrick said, his voice flat. If you want to challenge this, you'll need to go through the courts. But right now, this man has legal title, and unless you can show me a paper with a county stamp, he's within his rights to restrict access. Diane's lips pressed into a thin line, disappearing entirely. This isn't over. Merrick nodded. I'm sure it's not. But for tonight, it is. Everyone needs to clear out. The crowd dispersed slowly, some muttering, others silent. Diane shot me one last look, pure venom, before turning and walking back up the path. The noise faded. Car doors slammed in the distance. Engine started. Within minutes, the only sound left was water moving against the shore and my own breathing. I had won the first round, but the tightness in my chest told me this was just the opening act. Fletcher lingered near his patrol car, and I saw him turn back toward the lake, his gaze settling on something near the water's edge. I followed his line of sight to a large, moss-covered stone half buried in the dirt. Old carvings marked its surface, weathered by decades of rain and neglect. Fletcher stared at it longer than seemed necessary, then looked back at me. Sir, he said quietly, almost conspiratorially, is that the 1948 marker? I nodded. His jaw tightened again, and for the first time that evening, I saw uncertainty flicker across his face. You might want to look up County Record 1948, he said. There's something you should know. Before I could ask what he meant, he turned and walked back to his patrol car. The lake was quiet now. I walked over to the stone and crouched down, brushing away some of the moss with my hand. The carving was clearer up close, CR 48 etched deep into the granite, with a small symbol beneath it, an eagle's head, the old logo of the county engineer's office. Below that, barely visible, was another line of text almost completely obscured by lichen. I pulled out my phone and used the flashlight to illuminate it. Federal property, transferred 1952. I stood up slowly, the words echoing in my head. Federal property. That meant this lake had a history beyond what the bank had disclosed, beyond what the HOA knew, maybe even beyond what the county remembered. I took a photo of the stone, then another of the sign. Fletcher's warning replayed in my mind. Something you should know. He recognized the marker. He knew something about 1948, something he couldn't, or wouldn't, say in front of Diane. That meant there were layers to this dispute I hadn't uncovered yet. And if I wanted to hold this property, I'd need to dig deeper than just a deed. The journey to this moment had started 72 hours earlier, in a windowless conference room at First National Bank that smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee. I sat across from Clifton Hayes, a loan officer who looked like he had been signing papers since the invention of ink. He pushed a stack of documents toward me. "It's all clean now," Clifton said. "But I'll be honest, Mr. Holloway. Nobody has wanted this property for a long time." "Why not?" I asked. The price was suspiciously low for waterfront acreage. "It's complicated," he said. "The HOA claims easement disputes. Nothing formal, just noise. But enough noise to scare off buyers." I had pulled the folder toward me and found a photocopy of an old survey map, faded and barely legible. Someone had drawn a blue line across the lake's edge labeled Public Access Easement, but it was crossed out with a thick black X. In the margin, written in pencil, it said, "See Federal Waterway Plan 1948. That was the first breadcrumb. Clifton explained that back in the 40s, the lake was part of a military water reserve project that got scrapped. The land reverted to the county, then to private hands in '53. "But that's ancient history," he assured me. I wasn't so sure, but I signed anyway, because I'm stubborn and I like the water. Now, standing by the lake with Fletcher's warning in my ears, I knew I had to go back to the source. The next morning, I was at the county archive building, not the recorder's office, but the archives, the dusty basement where the real history lives. The archivist, a guy named Marvin who looked like he preferred paper to people, led me to the back. "Federal Waterway file," he muttered, pulling a box that hadn't been touched in decades. I opened the first folder. Inside was a planning memo dated June 1948. And there, stamped in red ink, was the condition of transfer from the federal government to the county. No public easement authorized unless explicitly recorded. I read that line 3 times. The HOA didn't just lack a claim. They were expressly forbidden from having one unless it was on the books. But then I found the smoking gun. In a folder labeled HOA Correspondence 1975 to 2005, I found 40 years of rejection letters. The HOA had asked for rights in 75. Denied. In 83. Denied. In 92. Denied. And then, I found the email. It was printed out, wrinkled, dated October 2003, from a man named Vernon Ashford, the former HOA treasurer, sent to the entire board. The subject line, "I can't be part of this anymore." The text read, "We know the lake isn't ours. The county council told us in '85. Our own lawyer told us in 2001. We are lying to homeowners, collecting fees for lake maintenance, and pretending we have legal standing when we don't. I'm resigning." My blood ran cold. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was fraud. They knew. Diane knew. They had been collecting fees for maintaining a lake they didn't own, based on rights they knew they didn't have. I took photos of everything. I bought trail cameras on the way home, motion-activated, night vision. I mounted them in the trees around the lake, hidden by camouflage netting. If they were going to play dirty, I needed eyes on the ground. And sure enough, the alert started coming at 2:30 a.m. that night. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I watched the live feed in grainy black and white. 2 figures in hoodies approached my new sign. They yanked it out of the ground and tossed it into the brush. Then, they walked over to the stone marker, the CR-48 stone. One of them pulled out a hammer and started chipping away at the carving, trying to erase the federal property symbol. I saved the video. I backed it up. This wasn't just trespassing anymore. It was destruction of evidence. I emailed everything to Claire Donovan, the county attorney. The videos, the federal documents, Vernon's email. I wrote one line. "I need to speak with you immediately." She called me 2 hours later. "Mr. Holloway," she said, her voice crisp. "Can you come in? And can you find Vernon Ashford?" I found Vernon 15 miles out of town, living in a small yellow house that looked like it belonged to a man who just wanted peace. He was 74, cautious, with eyes that had seen enough drama for one lifetime. When I showed him the email I'd found, he sighed, a long, heavy exhale that seemed to release 20 years of tension. "I kept copies," he said quietly. I knew someone would come asking eventually. He went to a desk and pulled out an accordion folder. It was a treasure trove. Bank statements showing $50,000 in collected fees for lake access. Minutes from board meetings where Diane explicitly told them to ignore the county and act like we own it. She threatened to sue me if I talked, Vernon said. But I'm old now. I don't have much left to lose. Will you testify? I asked. He looked at me, then at the folder. Yes, it's time. We drove to the county attorney's office together. Claire Donovan looked through the documents, her face hardening with every page. This is actionable fraud, she said. We're going to schedule a public hearing, a special session of the county commission. We're going to air this out in the daylight. The hearing was set for 7 days later. The HOA hired a high-powered lawyer named Russell Blackwell, a silver-haired shark in a three-piece suit. They threatened to sue me, sue the county, sue anyone who got in their way. But they didn't know about Vernon. The night of the hearing, the county hall was packed. Standing room only. Diane Pritchard sat in the front row, looking smug, flanked by 40 supporters in matching blue, Save Our Lake, t-shirts. They looked like a cult. The commissioner called the meeting to order. Diane went first. She gave a passionate, tearful speech about community, about heritage, about how I was a greedy outsider stealing their memories. Russell Blackwell followed up with a slick presentation about prescriptive easement, arguing that 40 years of use created a legal right, regardless of paperwork. Then it was my turn. I walked to the podium and plugged in my laptop. I didn't give a speech. I just put the timeline on the projector screen. 1948, federal government says no easement. 1953, county says no easement. 1975, HOA asks for easement. County says no. 1985, county memo. HOA claims are meritless. I looked at the crowd. They were quiet now. Then I put up the email from Diane. The one where she said, "No one will challenge us if we act like we own it." Gasps rippled through the room. Diane went pale. Russell Blackwell frowned, leaning in to whisper furiously at her. And finally, I said, "I'd like to yield the rest of my time to Mr. Vernon Ashford." Vernon walked to the mic. He looked frail, but his voice was steady. "We lied," he said simply. "We knew the lake wasn't ours. We collected the money anyway. Diane told us that if we repeated the lie long enough, it would become the truth." Diane stood up, screaming, "He's a liar. He's senile." The commissioner banged the gavel. "Sit down, Miss Pritchard." Russell Blackwell stood up slowly. He looked at Diane, then at the screen, then at the commissioners. I need a recess. I was not made aware of these documents." "There will be no recess," the commissioner said. She looked at her colleagues. "We've seen enough. The commission finds that Old Mill Lake is private property. The HOA has no standing. Furthermore, we are referring this matter to the sheriff for a fraud investigation regarding the misappropriated funds." The room exploded. People were shouting, pointing fingers at Diane. The supporters in the blue shirts looked betrayed. Diane grabbed her bag and tried to push through the crowd, but nobody was moving out of her way. The fallout was fast and brutal. The story went viral within 48 hours. HOA fraud exposed. The sheriff froze the HOA's bank accounts. Diane was removed from the board by a vote of no confidence, 135-2. Russell Blackwell resigned as their counsel. But the victory left a strange taste in my mouth. I owned the lake, yes. I had crushed the lies, yes. But looking at the empty shoreline, at the kids who used to fish there standing behind the fence looking sad, it didn't feel like justice. It just felt like emptiness. Then the county reached out with a proposal. "We want to fix this," Claire Donovan told me. "The county is willing to create a formal, recorded public easement. We will maintain the infrastructure, build a proper gate, and handle liability. You keep ownership, you get a significant tax credit, and the public gets access, legally." I thought about Vernon. I thought about the old man at the lake that first night. "Do it," I said. "But it has to be recorded. No ambiguity." 30 days later, I stood by the new gate. It was galvanized steel, sturdy and welcoming. A new sign hung there. Old Mill Lake, public access authorized. County easement recorded 2025, private property of Grant Holloway. There was a small ceremony. Commissioner Vaughn cut a ribbon. Vernon was there, smiling for the first time in years. Diane was nowhere to be seen. Word was she had moved 2 towns over to avoid the lawsuits. A man walked up to me, the same guy who had spoken at the hearing. the one who had worn the blue shirt. He extended a hand. "Mr. Holloway," he said, "I've been coming here since I was a kid. I thought you were the villain." "I'm sorry." I shook his hand. "It wasn't mine to keep from you," I said. "It was just mine to protect. There's a difference." I walked down to the water's edge as the families poured in. Kids ran to the shore, casting lines. The sound of laughter replaced the sound of sirens. I crouched down by the stone marker, the CR-48 carving still sharp under my fingertips. Justice isn't about crushing your enemies. It isn't about hoarding what's yours. It's about clearing away the lies so that the truth can stand on its own. The lake was quiet, the water lapping against the shore, but this time, the silence wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. And looking at the open gate, hearing the splash of a fishing line hitting the water, I knew I had made the right choice. Sometimes you have to close a door to open it properly. Thanks for listening to this one, guys. It was a wild ride. Let me know in the comments. Would you have given the easement back? Or would you have kept the lake for yourself after all that trouble? Share your thoughts. Hit that like button, and I'll catch you in the next story. Stay free.